Hello, everybody. Good day, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Martin, and I cordially welcome you to today's webinar, How to Make Realistic Delivery Time Commitments with Business Central. This is a webinar, so all you guys are on mute. If you'd like to ask a question, then please use the GoToWebinar chat pane. If I'm on PowerPoints, I will most likely answer it straight away. If I'm doing a demo, I will come back to your question either after the demo or at the end of the webinar, but I will make a comment or give an answer to every question that you ask. In case we haven't met before, I'm one of the owners and managing directors of Netronic Software from Germany. In our company, I'm responsible for everything we do related with Business Central and Microsoft Dynamics 365. Well, if we haven't met before, then make sure that you reach out to me on LinkedIn so that we can connect there and broaden both your and my network. So today, I will take you into a topic that, given the number of registrations we had with the webinar, seems to be of high interest to many people working with Business Central. And I will talk about delivery time commitments and especially making realistic delivery time commitments when you are a make-to-order manufacturing company. So I will deal with the production orders today. I will not deal with jobs or service orders or things like this, but I will solely focus on how to make realistic delivery time commitments when you work with Business Central manufacturing. So putting the webinar into perspective, I thought that this might sense because people always ask me what type of webinar this is. So when we run webinars, we can kind of segment them if you focus on features and functions or if you focus on business processes and best practices. And some of the webinars that we do are really beginner level and some of them are more advanced level and beginner and advanced in terms of being familiar with our product. So being familiar with my company's visual scheduling extensions. And like the beginner and feature and function webinars, these are introductory webinars, which we will run once in a while. If you focus on feature and function and we become more advanced, then this is either a what's new in webinar, where we don't introduce the products, but where we introduce new functionalities, or functional deep dive webinar. So functional deep dive webinar is something that I ran a couple of weeks ago when I talked about the VAPS color schemes. What's new in is a webinar that I will run again next week. I think same day, same time, when I will show what we will release very shortly when it comes to VAPS, VPS, and VJS. And then when it comes to business pros and best practices, typically the webinar starts something like with how to. So then we don't look at functions as bespoke functions of visual scheduling extensions for the sake of the function, but we look at those functions and put them into perspective of some business processes and challenges. And today's webinar is one of those webinars, and it's also an advanced level webinar. So it is really meant for people who are familiar with our visual scheduling extension. It will not give you an introduction into our products, but I need to cut some things short to lay some fundamentals also on the respective business processes and some of the best practices. So this is one thing. And then also in terms of expectation setting, so that you know what you expect. And I know that the question for every manufacturing company who fulfills customer orders, how to make realistic delivery time commitments when working with Business Central, is really bold, and it's even bolder than I put it onto this slide. So this is a bold question, and the good news is actually I will give you 3 answers to this question, or I will show you 3 methods, 3 different methods, how you can answer this question. And these different methods that I show you, they depend a little bit about your processes. They also depend upon your needs. We had 2 different type of needs, also in the invitation of the webinar. So is it that your customer expect a formal quote where you give a binding delivery time commitment, maybe even with some penalties that you have to pay when you don't deliver in time? Or is it that your customer is calling you and to give them the answer straight away while they're on the phone? And if you don't answer them straight away, or if you don't give them the answer they want to have, then they move to the shop down the street. So depending on what situation is, there are different methods I would recommend to kind of find an answer to the question, when can I deliver in time? The bad news is none of the methods that I show you is perfect. So each of the methods that I show you has disadvantages. So this is no webinar where you get a silver bullet. So if you expected to get a silver bullet today, I need to disappoint you. But this is just to show you 3 different methods that I've seen working with customers. I have seen them working, all of them working with our customers, but they need to be put into perspective. So if you apply them, you need to also be aware of the disadvantages. So there is the question if I'm recording, or if we are recording the session. Yes, definitively we are recording the session, and we will make it available on our YouTube channel, I think sometime tomorrow. And we will also send, once this is on YouTube, we will send an email to all participants, sharing with you and to everybody who registered, actually sharing the link to the recording. So yes, the webinar is recorded, and yes, we will make the recording available. Watch out our YouTube channel for that. So far in terms of expectation setting. So now let's state something very obvious, and it is really it should be a no-brainer, but I'm always kind of a little bit confused that this does not always seem to be clear. But the thing is, what does it mean to make a realistic delivery time frame? You only can make a realistic delivery time commitment. So you can only make a realistic commitment if your schedule is realistic, right? If you have an unrealistic schedule, how will you derive realistic delivery dates from this schedule? So if your schedule is unrealistic and you add a production order to it and derive a delivery date for this, then, well, you have a delivery date for production order that you might have calculated right, but it is based on the assumption of an unrealistic schedule. And this is what happens with, and I will talk about this in a minute again, this happens with many Business Central customers, actually, that they work with Business Central with the assumption of infinite capacity, have an unrealistic schedule, and then try to make realistic delivery time commitments based on this unrealistic schedule. So if it is really of importance for you to provide realistic delivery time commitments to your customers, you, in some point in your process, at some space in your process, you need to have some sort of finite capacity schedule. And I don't necessarily say that you need to have finite capacity scheduling software, but you need to have a schedule. You need to have information that tells you how your finite capacity will be utilized over the next couple of weeks or months or quarters, whatever your planning horizon is. Because if you don't have this finite capacity schedule, then you always have an unrealistic view on what is going to plan, and then you base all your delivery time commitments on an unrealistic schedule. And as said, I just spoke with you, need to have some sort of a finite capacity schedule, and this can be an Excel, it can be a scheduling software, it can be a scheduling software integrated into Business Central, it can be a scheduling software that is attached to Business Central, it can be a scheduling software that runs standalone, but it must take finite capacity into account. So I saw customers working in a proper way with a combination of Business Central to manage production orders and then Excel to manage capacity. This is, of course, not ideal, but as long as I can look into my Excel spreadsheet and see how my capacities will be utilized over the next couple of weeks, I see when I will have free capacity, and then from there I can make a conclusion as to when I can accept new orders again. But if I don't have this look somewhere, then I'm flying blind with respect to capacity, and then all my delivery time commitments are based on an unrealistic schedule, and so they are like worth not much. So if your business depends on providing realistic delivery time commitments to your customers, you need to have a view of your finite capacity schedule. You need to understand how your capacities will be utilized the next couple of weeks. And of course, in this webinar, I avoid Excel, but I just wanted to say that in some cases, Excel works. It works perfectly fine, but there are a lot of cases where it doesn't work. And as we're talking about like Business Central and ERP here in this community, definitively Excel is not always the best choice. So there's a new question coming up. The question is, can BC out of the box be used for capacity schedule? I mean, is it practical? I know it could be done. Well, stay with me in the webinar and I will provide some answers to this later on. So yes and no is the answer to this. And if you want to know which part of the answer is yes and which part of the answer is no, then please bear with me for the remainder of the webinar, or watch the recording once we made it available. But I will definitely provide an answer throughout the next 50 minutes to this question. So, although this seems to be obvious, many, if not most, manufacturers working with Business Central, they make delivery time commitments relying on the Business Central planning capability. So the out-of-the-box Business Central comes with MPS and MRP, Master Production Schedule and Material Requirements Planning. And the mechanism of a Business Central MPS and MRP, so of the planning worksheet, of the requisition work, the mechanism, the functionality, is super powerful, and it is more advanced than many comparable functions in comparable business management and ERP systems that I have seen on the market. So although these functions are really, really strong, we have to take into account that by default, both MPS and MRP in Business Central are executed with the assumption of infinite capacity. So the result of Business Central, MPS, and MRP is that you get a good balance between supply and demand for your items, that you get a good suggestion which production orders to create for to fulfill which demand. But all these suggestions are based on the assumption of infinite capacity. So it is unrealistic to some degree, and I think that this is an issue, and hence I thought to run this webinar to exactly deal with this issue and to provide a bit of perspective on how you can find an answer to the question, when can I deliver, or what kind of promise can I make to my customers in terms of delivering. And so when we talk about making a delivery time or a delivery time, making a delivery time commitment, I would say making a delivery time commitment, if we simplify it, we can break it down to two factors determining when we are able to deliver, right? This is, when will we have all material available? And I think this issue has become much more relevant in the last 12 to 18 months, with a lot of global supply chains being still impacted, if not broken. And we have the question, when will we have capacity available? So if we have capacity available and no material, we cannot deliver. If we have material available but no capacity, we can't deliver. I mean, we then could outsource, but still, in essence, if you simplify things, a delivery time commitment depends both on when is my material available, or when will be my material available, and when do I have capacity available to kind of produce that particular item, to produce that product. The focus of today's webinar, I will focus on how to make delivery time commitments based on capacity available. I will spare out material availability today. I know that material availability also is a big issue, but I thought I want to break this down and I want to make it step by step. So today I will talk on making delivery time commitments based on available capacity and based on capacity information. And I will show you 3 options that you as a Business Central manufacturing user have. In November, so maybe in a good month from now, I will run another webinar in which I will actually combine both things. So in which I combine, like, I will prepare a use case in which we look for material availability and capacity availability to then make delivery time commitments. So I will enhance the use case that I start with today. But today, the focus is on capacity available. We also have and we can give you some advice on how to tackle the material availability, but I want to do it step by step. So first, looking at capacity availability, because I think actually this is an issue based on how standard Business Central works, with the assumption of always infinite capacity. And once we have sorted this out, we will make a combined look at both material availability and capacity availability to give delivery time commitments in a webinar that is about to come, I would say in a month from now. So if we make delivery time commitments, I think overall, and again, this is simplified, there are a lot of scenarios, but I want to differentiate two different workflows or two different cases. And the first case, the sales people or people from the sales department, maybe inside sales or whoever they are called, they make the delivery time commitment. So the case is the customer calls with an inquiry, and then more or less the customer wants to get an answer while they are on the phone. And so it requires sales to make that delivery time assessment quite fast. So maybe the salesperson already creates the quote or gets an order, including the delivery time. They communicate the delivery time to the customer accepts the sales order, and then the production order is created, and then production is involved to schedule the production order. But scheduling only happens once the sales order is there. We create the production order, and sales has to make like the assessment of as to when can we deliver without having a concrete production order. So they may need to make this on the fly, looking at a report, looking at some statistics, looking at whatever, and then they make it on the fly. So they have the inquiry, and based on the inquiry and also based on their knowledge that they have, they need to make this delivery time commitment, well, more or less on the fly. Then they get the quote out to the customer, they accept it, we get the sales order, and from the sales order we create the production order, and then we get production involved. The other case is that we see the production people in charge for making that commitment. So we don't want them like kind of to take what sales tells them what they should deliver, but we want to have production in charge so that they make the delivery time commitment. So the customer calls with an inquiry. Again, the sales guys and girls create the quote and or the order, and then they check with production. So production creates whatever a production order or production make an assessment of the current production schedule, and then they give the date that they can commit to. Then sales communicates it to the customer, and if the customer accepts, we create the sales order. And then if we did the production before, we already have it in the system. If we didn't make the production order before, we need to make it here. But here, production has to fulfill what sales promised, and here production has to fulfill what production promised. So it's I think two really different cases depending on how you are organized, on how you want to whom of your departments you want to have in charge for this. There can be cases where this definitively is needed because you need to give answers very, very fast. You might want to have cases where you want to have this because you can afford that it takes a bit of time before you confirm a date to the customer, but then it must be very reliable, and the person who confirmed it also must be kind of responsible for delivering into it. Whereas here, you always have the production people making the excuse, hey, I didn't come up with a date. So we have these two cases, and I will drill down into these cases now going forward. So let's look into the first case, that sales makes the delivery time commitment. And when I look at Business Central, I think there are two options of how we can actually deal with this situation, that we have salespeople who have a customer on the call, they are inquiring something, and then they need to give a delivery time commitment. But again, if we let the salespeople make a delivery time commitment without checking with production, we somehow need to make sure that the sales team can base their commitments on a finite capacity schedule. So they need to have some transparency into which capacity is planned, which capacity is blocked for the next couple of weeks, months, and whatever. And they need to be they need to have access to this information, because otherwise the sales guys will completely fly blind. They make the promises the customer want to hear, and then you open the door widely for stress, either internally between production and sales, or between production and the customer and sales, or between sales and the customer. But if if we allow salespeople, and there are good reasons to allow them, if you allow salespeople to make delivery time commitments, we need to make sure that they are bound and that they have access to information that tell them how the capacity to utilize, so that they can make things that are realistic and not things that they just promise the customer in order to get the deal. And we all know that also the latter happens. So the first option that I actually have is that we could provide sales with a planned capacity load report. And again, this could be an Excel sheet. That could be an Excel sheet that production maintains and updates on a regular basis, and that show for this week, for next week, for the week after, how my work centers and how my machine centers are utilized. Just an Excel sheet, and we have like a planned utilization, whatever, as a percentage in this sales. Or we have the sales red if they're fully loaded. We have yellow if we have some flexibility, and green if we have full flexibility. Whatever, it could be as easy as this, but it requires that on the production side of things, we work with finite capacity scheduling software, so that we have the information to derive what I just explained, so that we have the capability to build a report that salespeople can look at and understand the capacity utilization. Ideally, the software integrates with Business Central in a way that it not only reads data, but that it also updates production orders and production routing lines, so that when we look at such a report, as long as it is part of Business Central, that is always current. The salespeople must have access to this kind of what I call planned capacity load report. And they also, and sometimes this is underestimated, and this has nothing to do with software, but they have to have an understanding of the production process, right? So if they get an inquiry, they need to know what kind of machines I need, roughly in which magnitude of order I need to fulfill this demand. If they have no clue what's happening on the shop floor, they can't make a delivery time commitment, because then they are flying blind. So they need to have capacity information and planned capacity information, and they need to have an understanding of the production process, so that they can assess, okay, for that item, we would need that machine center, that work center, and that work center. And then if they combine this knowledge with information about when capacity is utilized, they can look at the plan, at the capacity plan, and say, okay, we have free capacity again in 5 weeks, so maybe, well, we can deliver in 7 weeks, something like this. So an example process here is we get an inquiry, right? And then the sales, they create a sales quote. They look at the report that I just explained, and I'll show you an example of such a report, actually 2 examples of such a report in a minute. So they check the report for planned capacity load. They make an assessment of when capacity will be available to fulfill this demand. And then most likely, if they're clever, they add a bit of buffer to it, and then they make a rough commitment, like we will deliver by end of week 49. Then they give this information to the customer. Once the order is received, they make the sales order from the sales quote. And then either they create from the sales order, the production order, or the planning worksheet in Business Central recognizes new demand and creates production order. And now that we already have received the sales order, the production order hears from it the first time and can schedule it within their scheduling system. So let's look at how such a report that just tells salespeople how the capacity utilization is, how this can look like. And I will now move first time in this webinar to Business Central and actually show you 2 alternatives. One that is purely standard Business Central. So let's assume, let's make it simple. Let's assume we receive an order for an item, and we know that for this we'll need a cutting one, my machine cutting one. So then I can go actually to the machine center, and the machine center is drilling one, not cutting one. We go to drilling one, and then there is a report that is called machine center load, and for me it's it's 23, so I can see, okay, from here, right, in January 23, let's go to January 23, sorry for that, January 23, I see, okay, in January I have a total capacity of whatever 20,000 minutes, and have in January I'm loaded on this drilling machine one, I'm loading to 56%. In February I'm loaded higher. So and I have just data of half of January in here because it's middle of January. So it basically tells me I'm fully blocked in January and I'm almost blocked in February. So from here, if I just would need drilling one, I could tell the customer, okay, we will deliver an early March because the capacity is fully utilized in January. Given that half of January is done, and for the second half of January, I have 56% load, and February loaded to 70%. So not much chance to most likely to squeeze something in on drilling one before mid of February. So maybe delivery early March. So this is the easy case of having just an item that just requires one machine. But if we have routings, if we have production that requires multiple machines, then going from machine center to machine center to machine center might be a bit cumbersome. And hence, what we could use to facilitate this use case, actually use our product, the VPS, which is actually meant to help with drag and drop production scheduling, but we could give access to the salespeople to what we call the histogram view of the VPS. And the histogram view of the VPS give you exactly the same information that I had before, but consolidated on one sheet of paper or consolidated on one screen. And it shows you the planned utilization for every work and machine center, here in this case by day. I think it's by day. So here we are, right now it's by week actually. So this tells me that my drilling machine 1 is fully utilized this week, fully utilized next week, fully utilized the week after, fully utilized in week 6. I have some free capacity in week 7, no capacity in week 7. I have some capacity in week 8, and then week 9, full capacity free. I am drilling 2, same utilization, but having some capacity in week 8, free capacity in week 9. So if I'm looking at this something, and then if I have a production or that whatever requires drilling, milling, sawing, and welding, I see, okay, if I do milling first, or if I do sawing first, I have some capacity available earlier. But if I require drilling, I know I'm fully utilized until week 7. So maybe I can get squeezed in drilling in week 8. So then maybe if we have processes following after drilling, we can tell the customer, okay, we can deliver by the end of week 9 on the 5th of March, or even by the end of week 10. And a picture like this, where machine centers are not overloaded, this is achieved by finite capacity scheduling software. So I didn't use in this company, I didn't use the VPS to schedule. I just used the VPS to get a picture of the capacity. I used the VAPS to schedule, but this is finite capacity scheduling with the VAPS. We will talk about this in a minute. But if I have a finite capacity scheduling software, I can use a report like this to see by week what is my utilization, when I will have a free capacity on my machine centers and my salespeople. I can go in here, I understand this. I see, okay, you see actually, drilling down, I see, okay, my quality guys, they are busy until end of week 9. So I can tell my customers, okay, it is very realistic that we cannot deliver to you earlier than at earliest in week 10, because my quality guys, they are fully utilized until end of week 9. So we can produce your stuff by the end of week 9. We do some quality control in week 10. So by the end of week 10, we can deliver. This is information I can conclude from here, and I can tell this to the customer. And then I can send the quote to the customer with the item, with the delivery time commitment, whatever, 10th of March. And we can send it to the customer. If you get the quote, we create the production order, and then we know it should fit in if the process from sending out the quote to getting the order is fast. And with this is the first answer of what we can do, is just looking at aggregated data if they are, and again, you only can look at a report like this if this was built with finite capacity scheduling software. Otherwise, you look at unrealistic data and it will tell you nothing. But if this type of information is built with a finite capacity scheduling software, such as the VAPS, then an image like this makes much sense for salespeople to look at and to make conclusions as to when they can make a commitment in terms of delivery. But of course, they need to have knowledge about the production process and the requirements in the production process. The pros and cons of this approach is it's quick and dirty, right? So I think this pro, being pragmatic, oftentimes is a pro. I think being pragmatic, if you're small and mid-sized business, and most of us are small and mid-sized business, then being pragmatic actually can be it can be even our competitive advantage, right? It can be our USP. So it is not, I would say it can be a pro to also internally, when we do these things, have a quick and dirty approach. A pro definitely is with a report like this, we don't overload with sales too much information. So they don't know which production order is scheduled when, and we don't bother them with this, but we just give them information about the capacity utilization. That's quite easy to implement and it's fast to execute. Salespeople will learn this quite quickly. Well, quick and dirty is also, of course, it's a disadvantage, right? Because you can say, hey, this is not accurate enough, and there's a lot of guesswork involved. And if you tell them, I have to admit, you're right, but still there might be cases, there might be companies for which this approach really will work. There are others who say we need it much more sophisticated, and I would totally agree with this. The thing is, you don't get this report out of the box Business Central. It gives you the load overview, as I showed you, only per machine and work center. So Business Central out of the box has no consolidated view over the plant capacity like I have here. So this consolidated view would be something that your partner would have to develop for you, or that you have to develop for you, or you would need to get it out of the VPS. The thing is, the VAPS is built not to provide this report, but this is just one view of the VPS. The VPS is built for drag and drop scheduling. So it is not standalone, and we would need to kind of to provide some ideas how salespeople could access this without giving them the capability to show the other view so that they destroy your plan. Also, our finite capacity scaling product is the VAPS, and this view here right now is not part of the VAPS. But if you think that this could be useful in combination with your VAPS usage, and I know we have at least one customer on the call who told me that this view will be very useful for them in combination with the VAPS, then talk to us, and we will definitely find a good way to cope with this demand that you have. A bigger con is that this process is not integrated into any Business Central process, right? You have your finite capacity scaling Business Central, you look at this, and then you give the customer some information, but production only gets involved in the process very late. The production order is created very late. The demand is created very late. And hence, there is also a second option for the case, hey, the salespeople need to give the answer. And this is much more tied into the overall Business Central processes, into the Business Central functionality. But there are a zillion words of caution needed if we talk about the process via the capable to promise function. I held a webinar just on how to make reliable delivery time commitments with the capable to promise function in May this year. And I will also do actually a speech at a big Business Central partner conference taking place in November in Hamburg on this. So using the capable to promise function under certain conditions can be really, really a cool option to give realistic delivery time commitments and to be less quick and dirty than with the previous approach. But there are some pros there are some cons and some disadvantages that I cannot fully unroll in this webinar. But if you're more interested in this, either look at the webinar, at the recording of the May 2022 webinar that I had, or reach out to me so that we can figure out for you guys if this approach would work. If we do this, there is one requirement on Business Central production, and this is really, more than essential, is if you follow this approach, you need to set up all your work and machine centers as what is called capacity constrained resource in Business Central. So Business Central has a function with which you can schedule with finite capacity, and this function is useful to run the capable to promise function and to get realistic delivery time commitments. But this function is really useless when it comes to production scheduling. So for production scheduling, you then definitely, if you want to use the capable to promise function, and if you set up Business Central with capacity constrained resources, you must utilize a finite capacity software, a scheduling software that is fully integrated with Business Central and that updates production orders. The VAPS is one example, but there are other finite capacity scheduling software solutions out there that also integrate with Business Central and that update production orders. But having this is a must. Otherwise, the capacity constrained resources and the way of how Business Central deals with capacity constrained resources will drive you crazy. The good news is for your sales guys, they don't need any new reports, any special reports, any special tools. They can just work with the sales order. So let's look at how the workflow would work in this case after the receipt of a new inquiry. Well, in that case, sales would need, with a new inquiry, would need to create a sales order, not a quote. And I will come to this in a minute again, because the capable to promise function out of the box is only available for sales orders. So sales would create a sales order. It would execute the capable to promise function and would accept the date that is given there. Then sales would communicate the delivery time to the customer. The good thing here is as soon as the date that Business Central has calculated is accepted on the sales order, we get a new demand line in the planning worksheet. So then we already know that there is a demand for that delivery. So then when the planning worksheet is run next time, the production is created and then production can schedule it accordingly. So now we don't depend on, like before, we had the sales quote and we turned it into sales order and then we created the production order from there very late. But here already, when we give the date to the customer, unfortunately, it's only on sales order level, but when we give the date to the customer, then already the demand line is created on the planning worksheet. So I would always do is I would create a sales order, execute the capable promise function, communicate it to the customer, and we could make it more complex. When it is accepted, have a new demand list, a new demand line on the planning worksheet, production plans the production order, and then when the customer actually confirms the order, then I would release the sales order, so that then we know, okay, this is a released sales order, and then we keep the demand. And if a customer doesn't order it, we would delete the sales order, and then we need to delete the according production order. So let's have a look at this workflow, and now I will actually execute the capable to promise function in association with the VAPS. So let's leave the VPS very quickly. Capacity constrained resources. Here in the environment, they are all my machine network, all my machine centers are set up to capacity constrained resources. So Business Central has some mechanism that they take into account now that these resources are utilized. And you saw the resource utilization that I have. So now I'm the salesperson. I'm getting a new demand from my customer. And this might be whatever. It's the Canon Group. What else? And the Canon Group, they want from me whatever. They want item 5012 in the quantity of whatever, 88. So they want the item quantity 88. And then what I can do here is I can go to plan, I can go to order promising, and I can say capable to promise, and capable to promise calculates, and this is shown in the tooltip there. So I'm reading now, calculates the earliest date that the item can be achievable if it is to be produced, purchased, or transferred, assuming that the item is not in inventory and no orders are scheduled. This function is useful for what if scenarios. So now I can check when am I capable to promise, and you have seen the schedule before, so I would assume this is sometimes early March. I run this and I see, okay, the earliest shipment date is the 8th of March. So like we had before, we say, hey, look, customer, whatever you want from us, given my current capacity utilization, we can deliver second week of March. And this is also what this function now tells me. And if I accept this, then, and we can actually do this if I accept this. So now I accepted this. I accepted this this date, the planned shipment date 8th of March for this item. If I now go and run the planning worksheet next time, you see there is already a demand line for this. So I now have the demand line for this already in the planning worksheet. And now let's assume production already wants to schedule this so that we reserve the capacity for this. We would execute execute the planning here. We would make a firm planned production order. Then in the VAPS, we would build a new simulation. Delete the one that we had. We would create a new simulation. And here we would now see, and this is the nature of the VAPS, we would see the production order on what we call the standby resources, because this production order now was added to Business Central and is not yet scheduled by me as the production scheduler. So now I have this production order here on the standby resource as it was scheduled from Business Central by the Business Central finite capacity scheduling mechanism. I would schedule at all, including alternatives, and then I would add it to the schedule. And you see, I also can meet this date that we promised to the customer based on my finite capacity schedule. So then I, as a production planner, can now confirm to the salesperson, like, okay, here, actually we have planned it to finish on the 7th of March, and I can even I should be able to see this actually in the sales order view. Not sure, yeah, there it's on sales order view. So I can say, okay, dear salesperson responsible for sales order 1034. Your customer has we have scheduled the production of 88 units for the item, what was it, 5012, and we will be finished then, and we will meet the date as required from your customer. And then I can publish the simulation. We would update the production accordingly, and everything is planned as we wanted, and everything is now scheduled as we communicated to the customer. So we have a very closed loop from the sales order over the planning worksheet to the production order. And also if we go to the sales order, here, and sorry for that, let me do it from here. If we go to the sales order that we just created, the 1034, then we see that we also have the production order that we just created and that I just scheduled. The production order is reserved for the sales order. So it is really full circle. And sales could give this delivery date of the 8th of March because on the one hand, we set up Business Central with the capacity constrained resources, and because we're using the VAPS for finite capacity scheduling. Both aspects need to be secured at any time. So the process that I showed you will not work without a finite capacity scheduling software, and the process that I showed you will not work if you don't switch on the capacity constrained resources function. So what is the pro and what is the con? The pro is obviously this approach is much better integrated into Business Central. Also with the planning worksheet processes, as you have seen, salespeople don't need any reports. So they don't need to learn anything new. They just need to work with sales orders and run the capable to promise function. So very easy, very efficient for sales to handle. I think this is the fastest way of getting reliable delivery time commitments. However, the cons is you need to set up Business Central with capacity constrained resources, and this comes with some significant disadvantages And this really makes both the VAPS and proper processes a must. And if you want to learn more about this, get in contact with me or watch the webinar that we had, that I held in May this year. Assumption is the delivery date that we get calculated still is based on the business central capacity constraint logic, and some of the assumptions are not realistic. So the delivery dates that we give to the customers must be seen as best possible assumption. In my case here, that I just made up, it worked. So Business Central gave me a date that when I added to the schedule, I could confirm, but there might be cases where it not worked. So also, a con is, in my opinion, this approach does not include any production planner know-how. So again, we don't get the production planner involved early. So we throw them something to the schedule that already have a committed date, but the production people didn't confirm in advance. So this can be quite tricky. I think the biggest disadvantage is that this approach requires a sales order. So in Business Central Standard, this function cannot be run from a sales quote. And so you need to have the sales order. So the thing is then that if you do it like this, you create the sales order, and from the sales order, as you saw, I create the production order. There is a risk that you create an excess supply that you produced, especially if your customer doesn't order. Then you have the sales order in the system based on the sales order with the accepted date. You created the production order. If the customer doesn't order this, you forget about this, you produce this, and then you have the material on stock and no demand for it. So I think this can be really tricky. And there's another thing that you also need to know. This capacity constrained resources function, as in Business Central, only works if your work and machine centers have a capacity of 1. So if your work or machine centers have a capacity larger 1, it will not work. And now you rightfully might say, okay, but then the VAPS also works with the assumption of the finite capacity of 1. This is right today. It won't be right anymore next week. So a little spoiler, I will run a webinar in 1 week from now where we talk about what is new in VAPS, VPS, and VJS. And with the VAPS, we will finally be able to handle finite capacity larger 1. So the last thing then here is right now, it was a disadvantage of Business Central and the VAPS. Going forward, it only will be an advantage of Business Central and the Business Central capacity constrained resources. So there are some limitations to this approach. And now we have seen 2 approaches, and you need to figure out, in your case, what weighs more, the pros or the cons. Both are not perfect, but there are situations where I definitively would recommend the one, and there are situations where I definitively would recognize the latter. The latter here, the second approach that I showed you, is much stronger because it's much more integrated into Business Central, but it has this risk here, and so it requires very proper processes. Talking about requiring very proper processes, let's turn to the second case. The second case was the production makes the delivery time commitment, right? So far, we had 2 options where we would allow our salespeople to make the delivery time commitments, but there might be cases where we say, okay, we want the salespeople sell and we want the production people make production, and they should own the delivery time commitments because they are responsible for it. And in this case, I really recommend working with the VAPS, with the Visual Advanced Production Schedule, with our extension for finite capacity scheduling integrated into Business Central. Requirement is that production people work with VAPS, and for the sales, we have no additional requirements, so they can just use with sales orders and sales quotes as if they would work with them anyhow. So the process is, if you receive a new invoice, a new inquiry, sales would create an open sales quote. I would say they would check with production for delivery time. So production then would need to create, I would recommend, a planned production order to block capacity on the schedule. Production would schedule the new production order and then commit a date. Sales then adds the date to the sales quote, release the quote and sends to the customer. So a released sales quote would always be a quote with a confirmed date from production. And then once the order is received, sales informs production. The production changes the status from planned to firm planned, so that then we can reserve on that production order. Then sales turns the sales quote into sales order and reserves the firm planned order to the sales order. So let's look at this process again very briefly. So let me go back to Business Central again. Wrong one. So now let's do it step by step. We get a sales quote, right? We create a new sales quote, and I don't want Canon again. So for John Haddock Insurance, they have an overdue balance, but I ignore this for the time being. And they would want whatever, item 5011, and they would want whatever, 55 pieces of this item. So now we would tell our people in production, so the salesperson, and let me now open a second tab for my production guys. The production people would add a planned, I would say a planned production order first to have it as vague as possible. Because we are talking about an inquiry, so we would add a planned production order for item, what was this, 5011, 55 pieces. And we know roughly, we know that because I'm the production planner, I know, okay, well, maybe. So my gut feel tells me this will be available by someone in March, so that I just create the production order and have rough date there. Then I would open my finite capacity scheduling solution. I would create a new simulation. I would include the planned production orders, and then open it again. Now I have a new situation. I have a new production order. So the new production order again will show up on the standby resource, and I will have to schedule it. And now let's assume it will not be only this one inquiry that I add, but we have whatever 5 salespeople, and they're all selling like crazy. So I would have a couple of production orders now here on the standby resource. Then I would say schedule add all, or add all including alternatives, so that I can add this to the schedule, and then I can see, okay, actually, yeah, Mr. Salesperson or Mrs. Salesperson, I scheduled it to be ready in week 10. So then I have it now as a firm, as a planned production order on my schedule. I publish the simulation. Salesperson would go and say, okay, whatever end of, we promised the customer week 10. So the end of week 10 is the 10th of March. So this would be the date the salesperson would quote to the customer, and then they would release the sales quote, so that they know, okay, we have given a date to the customer, and this date was confirmed by the customer. Then later on, we receive, and now the capacity is blocked. We already have capacity blocked in the schedule. We're given a realistic delivery time commitment, and sales sends the quote to the customer, and at some point of time, the customer confirmed. So then I would say the sales informs customer like, hey, John Haddock, they have confirmed the order. We need to produce it. So then, as a production planner, I would go and change the status and move it from move it to release, so that or to firm planned, so that then the salesperson actually can come and say, okay, now process, I make the order. So I make from the sales quote, it was accepted, I make the sales order, and now that I have the firm plan production order in here that meets this date, I can say from here, function reserve, I can look at what is available to reserve, and I see there is a firm plan production order with exactly 55 units that is available to reserve. So I reserve from here, and then the production order that was created previously now is reserved for the sales order, and I have a closed loop process where I involved the production people very early, where they created the production order manually to mirror the demand. And then afterwards, from the sales order, we made the reservation for an already existing production order. And again, I've given a realistic delivery time commitment to my customer, now one that production is involved. And again, this could only be achieved because my production people worked with a finite capacity scheduling software. And again, like we did before, also this is not the silver bullet. There are pros. This is fully integrated into Business Central. And again, it works with the planning worksheet and everything. With this approach, sales can focus on selling and production owns production. Especially production is responsible for the delivery times, which I always would prefer. We have a clearer definition of responsibilities. Better than before, that this approach also works with sales quote, and we have a much timelier inclusion of the production people into the process. So production does not learn about the production order after sales sent us the order, but they know before, and they with the approach of the planned production orders, they can block some capacity. The con is this. What I just did quickly, it requires a much clearer process definition as before. So we need to make sure when to create the planned production order, when to delete the planned production order, when to turn the planned production order into a release production order, when to create the sales quote, when to turn the sales quote from open to released, when to make the sales order from the sales quote. So this is a lot of processes that need to be defined, and people need to stick to it. Well, this is a con, but it can also be seen as a pro, because having clearly defined processes oftentimes helps organizations to become better. But some people would also argue, well, this is too much overhead work to take care of. So you can see it both ways. I put it as con because I saw it from the perspective of this. There's definitely some overhead, because we also need to manually create the production order to mirror the capacity demand that comes from the potential capacity demand that comes from the sales quote. And also here we have the risk of producing excess supply if the customer does not order what we quoted them. However, if the production order status is planned, if this production order status plan is used solely for this use case, the risk is manageable, because then production people from time to time can just check their planned production orders and then check with sales if they should still leave it on the system, or if the quote already was turned down by the customer. Also, the planning worksheet will take care of getting rid of some of the planned production of with the status planned. Also, what could be seen as a con is that there is an additional step needed when answering the customer question, when can you deliver? So the sales people cannot answer it right away. The sales people have to tell the customer, wait, I can give you delivery time, but I need to talk to production. So maybe I will call you later or call you tomorrow. And I know that there are business cases out there where already this is a no-go, where customers expect that sales answer the question right away. But if you can afford having a time gap between getting the inquiry from your customer and answering the question, then I think this is absolutely acceptable to do it like this. On the other hand, this additional step here makes sure that production commits to what they will have to do ultimately. So again, yes, there is this additional step, but if this is not a no-go for your business, then consider taking into account, because in the end, there are some advantages when production people, or when people at all, commit to what they have to do. And with this, I ran through the cases that I prepared. As indicated earlier, I gave you 3 methods to answer the question, how to give a realistic delivery time commitment. I said that all 3 methods are not perfect. I hope that I could prove that they would work, and I hope I could, well, give you some new ideas for your business. But I also know that you will agree with me that none of this is perfect, but I think most of this is better compared to what many other customers do. And if you have no question, then I would like to thank you for your attention. Here are my contact details. So if you have a question, get in contact with me, and then we set up a meeting to discuss. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I see there's a question coming. Can reservation only be made in firm plan production orders, also in released production orders? But to my knowledge, reservation will not work against planned production orders. So this is something that I will have to check, and then I will reach out to you again. But my knowledge is the reservation goes to the firm planned and to the released production orders, but not to the planned production orders. So the planned production orders are really the most vague status a production order can have. I hope that this answered your question. If I have different, so I will definitely have a look into this. If I get additional information, then I will send you an email. If you don't hear from me, then take this as confirmation that my answer was right. So with this, thank you very much for today. Looking forward to see you actually next week in the webinar where we talk about what is new in VAPS, VPS, and VJS, and especially the VAPS release is major for us. So I'm very excited to see what we are getting there, and I will be very excited to share this with you next week. And until then, take care and see you next week. Bye-bye. Bye for now.